Order. Welcome to this morning's evidence session. This is the first session of our inquiry into joined-up journeys. Our inquiry will examine how government can shape transport services to meet the needs of transport users and the journeys that we make in our daily lives. We'll also be looking ahead to the government's promised integrated transport strategy. This morning we'll be hearing from a panel of transport experts who will be providing us with an overview of the key issues. So I'd like to ask if you could please introduce yourselves. Kate, do you want to go first, please?
I'm Kate Carpenter, Vice President of the Chartered Institution of Highways and Transportation. We're a charity and membership body, learner society, involved in the planning, delivery and management of transport infrastructure.
Hi, I'm Rob Johnson. I'm Senior Analyst at think tank Centre for Cities. We're an independent think tank looking to improve the economic performance of the UK's 63 largest cities and towns.
Hi, I'm Greg Marsden. I'm a Professor of Transport Governance at the Institute for Transport Studies, University of Leeds.
Thank you. And I'm going to bring in Damien, who's joining us on the screen this morning for some transport issues.
Yeah, sorry I'm not there in person. There was no trains yesterday, so from Devon. I'm Damien Jones. I'm Deputy Director for Transport, Environment and Waste at Devon County Council. I'm the National Chair of the Association of Transport Co-ordinating Officers, which represent officers around the UK managing passenger transport in local authorities.
Brilliant, and we'll bring you in when we bring everybody else in, as and when, Damien, so thank you for joining us online. Great, well, I think that means I have the first question to kick us off, if that's okay. How important is integration for delivering an effective, reliable and affordable transport system in the UK? And I'm actually going to bring Damien in first so that I don't forget.
It's really important and really crucial, and I think it's particularly from a lot of my members cover rural areas, and when you've got less frequent services and you've got issues with timings, if you can't get that integration right and you can't get those joined up journeys, it's a bigger delay, it causes less confidence, and it also results in people thinking that I can't use that sustainable transport option, so then they opt for the private car. And we've particularly seen that in a lot of the longer journeys since COVID. I think in a rural area, it's also really important. There's a second aspect of integration, which is about how local authorities and the public sector integrate their transport requirements together as well. And there are issues around that, particularly in rural areas where you haven't got those frequent services and you haven't got that sort of option to walk or cycle those longer distances.
Great, thank you. I'll bring Kate in next, if I may.
Yeah, so it's a sort of across the range. If individual journeys don't join up, and that might be within modes or between modes, between different train operators, between buses, trains, between walking and cycling and trains. At an individual level, people don't have opportunities to travel. Uncertainty breeds deterrence. Anxiety deters people travelling or skews their mode, which means they don't meet their own needs, the economic impact on businesses, on individuals, and a big disparity in equality of access to transport. That the joined-upness affects people with disabilities, people who are older, people with children. They're much more affected. People on low incomes, they have fewer choices.
Thank you so much, Robert.
Yeah, I'd like to focus on the economic angle and particularly on our large urban areas. So the function of transport in that respect is to connect people to economic opportunities, jobs, education. And if you look at our big cities, we know that they underperform on productivity, and a big part of that, particularly in our cities in the north of England and outside the southeast, is due to underperforming transport networks. And the integration aspect is important because the network size is similar to European cities, but actually the number of people who can take easy journeys to reach the centres of the economy in those places is a lot smaller because the system is fragmented across modes, there's different levels of governance, and so integration, making that network function as one system, making it more efficient, dealing with bottlenecks and avoiding duplication is really important. If you're going to connect more people to these opportunities, you're going to deepen the labour markets in these big cities, and then you're going to get all the benefits associated with that, better matching between employers and workers, and more exchanging of ideas, and you see that productivity rise.
Great, thank you. And Greg?
Yeah, I think this is a major opportunity. We're still in a time where the majority of our bus services can't talk to each other about what time they're running their services or what their fare levels should be at. So we have to seize this opportunity coupled with the plans for rail. And that will allow us to at least begin to behave in ways that the European cities that we would hold up as good benchmarks do their planning for integration. So I think we need to be ambitious, but we also need to be realistic. 93% of our journeys are not multimodal. In London, that's 82%. So there is scope to improve, but obviously within London, you've got a much richer network of opportunities for people to interchange. So we can certainly make things a lot better, but this isn't going to be a panacea for everything in the transport sector. I also think we need to be aware that the commercial imperatives have stripped out a lot of the things that you might do to integrate between journeys, and therefore if we want a better quality of service, then we may end up having some additional costs to be borne as we do that. And there are still some institutional barriers for us to work through, which I'm sure you'll want to talk about.
Brilliant, thank you very much. Steph,
thank you. Forgive me for sounding reductive, but transport is about getting people from where they are to where they want to be. And if you assume that to be a given, then integrated transport networks are just the ways that they can use different types of transport to achieve the same ends. We're going to touch on various barriers, I'm sure, but what are the stepping stones to delivering a really effective integrated transport network that's truly multimodal, able to seamlessly switch between types of transport in order to achieve that one founding principal aim? If I start with Kate, and I'll go around and then end with Damien.
So it's the sort of the three layers of infrastructure, the physical infrastructure, and that means the individual modes and the points where they connect. But also the points each end, we forget the little bits of it. You know, there's no point in your bus being accessible if there aren't drop curbs to get to your bus. You know, there's no point in being able to afford to take your 3 children on the train if the loo doesn't accommodate your train. It's that doesn't accommodate your children. It's the physical built infrastructure, the connections between those infrastructure. That's the built stuff. There's the digital stuff. The ticketing, the platforms, the timetabling and the coordination, both from a planning journey and within a journey. When you're delayed, how do you find information? Real-time ticketing information, passenger information that is real-time, isn't just a digital display of a timetable, which a lot of them are. And then the other area of the digital infrastructure is there Wi-Fi in a station? Is there information on a train? Is there access to information? So it's the three layers: the built infrastructure, the virtual infrastructure that facilitates the ticketing and the information, both from a planning and during a journey, but also the wider aspects of that, of the certainty and the understanding.
So you've got to have the stuff, got to have the information, got to have the know-how and the understanding. Anyone want to build on that or violently disagree or any other elaboration?
I'm happy to build on that. I'd echo the digital ticketing side of things. You know, this is ticketing and timetables. Like you said, it's about getting people from A to B, almost irrespective of what mode that is. And then that will allow greater synchronization between modes. What I'd like to add there is integration of governance as well. So I think when we're talking about integrated transport, it's really important that we know what level of geography we're talking about. Now, an integrated transport network at the national level is going to be very different to one, say, at a city level. And we see this in the city regions where you have mayors and combined authorities with relatively unified powers over their transport networks, and what that allows them to do is it allows them to plan strategically with the network as a whole in mind, rather than thinking about fragmented individual modes that may duplicate each other, that may compete with each other. It's about getting that network to work as one system.
One stepping stone is making sure someone has the actual job of being able to see the whole thing and influence the whole picture.
Overcoming a coordination problem.
Yeah, right. Very interesting. Thank you. Greg.
Yeah, so I think the one brand, one network, one kind of ticket approach is really important, but I think we need to be careful when we're thinking about ticketing. There's payment, right? So one platform for paying makes it nice and easy. That's not the same as having integrated ticketing where you've got cap fares for all different modes of transport. So, for example, the system that's in Berlin, you have got integration across bus rail, but they've got a payment platform where taxis, car share and coach and so on can be paid through one platform, but that isn't integrated fares.
Yeah.
So we've got to be really careful, I think, what we're describing as integration. And I think that's one of the bits of clarity that I would like to see from the white paper, is how far we're going or what we're enabling in different areas.
Right, thank you. Damien, stepping stones to integrated public transport.
Yeah, just building on and going in slightly different from what's been said already. I think that one of the really important things is around reliability. You can change the way, for example, bus services are governed, but you still have those issues with congestion, and it is really difficult to get those priorities in on the network, particularly where you've got congested cities like Exeter, for example, where it's really difficult and you haven't got the road space. So you need to ensure you've got that sort of system in place that gives the confidence that the journeys are going to run to time, and and linking it back to real time. So like if there's congestion, if there's major incidents, the railway yesterday was really good at informing what was happening, but you don't get that across all modes. And there's incidents that's happened on any daily basis that people will look at an app, and that information, like was said, would just be the actual timetable time, not the issues around the things that are happening on the ground. And that comes back to a lot of the technology that's being used in the industry isn't always up to date. And I think the other thing about the stepping stones is some of the things that some of us have tried to do is to sort of put services in place at an early stage, particularly where you've got new developments, where you've got a new development where you can put a railway station in and you can put linked buses in. You get that higher level of users using the sustainable options, and you can have cycle lanes and all those kinds of things. Where you then get developments where that isn't put in place, then you do tend to get a higher reliance on the car because you haven't got that infrastructure and that network of integrated services available.
Thank you. If I may just ask one more. I need to set the scene here. So I got a bus recently. I went to my nearest official bus stop, which is unmarked, unpaved at the side of a road that luckily has just been reduced to 30 miles an hour. If I was a regular user of that bus, I'd probably pick up and get involved in some sort of consultation. But as I'm not, probably no one's going to consult me on my public transport needs. And even if I was consulted, what they probably wouldn't ask me is, would you get the bus more often if you could drive 2 miles down the road, park easily and catch a quicker service? So that's just not in the scope of consultation. How well understood is integration between modes other than bus and rail? We all understand bus and rail integration. How well understood is it when it comes to other modes of transport, including, dare I say, private car, particularly in rural areas? We'll come on to rural areas more generally later on, I'm sure.
Yeah, I think this is a really important point. We wrote a report 4 or 5 years ago on shared mobility, and in particular I think National Highways has an important role to play in terms of integration. So coach networks, coach journeys are really long because they detour off the motorway into the city, back out again. You would think that we would have integration at motorway junctions, for example, but actually sometimes it works the other way. They're trying to manage to keep things away from the motorway junctions to keep them moving. So National Highways should definitely be on the hook here, thinking about what is the role of their network in facilitating more integrated journeys. But I think it spreads right out across our thinking in terms of suburbs. Generally, public transport interchange, I think, is thought about the main bus stations or the main train stations. And there's a lot of informal interchange that can happen and does happen in our suburbs, and we don't invest in that. Now, things like mobility hubs can be a way forward, but I don't see the ambition here in the UK that you see elsewhere in Europe on things like mobility hubs. So we've got to go much beyond bus, rail and even bike integration in the white paper, I think.
Right, thank you. Anyone else? Yes.
Yeah, I'll take that from the angle where a truly integrated transport system has to consider all modes of how people get around, and in some cases that means balancing the trade-offs between public transport and road transport. So what we know in our urban areas, if you want to move people from where they live to, say, where they work, the most efficient way of doing that is via public transport. It takes up far less space, and space is a sort of a limited resource in these places. And so if you're thinking about, let's say improving public transport, better joining up buses and rail, you've also got to consider, okay, what are people's outside options, and does that fit with my wider goals? As a way of example, we did some modelling at Centre for Cities, looking at what if you took steps towards integration in our largest cities outside of London. So you see, big increases in number of people who can reach the city centres within 30 minutes in places like Sheffield and Leeds. It's about a 50% increase. But if you look at those people who are brought within the accessibility area, half of them would still find it much easier to drive. And if you are concerned about, say, bus speeds, and you think that, if you're trying to get more people into your city centres and access those opportunities, at some point you've got to think about, in your transport strategy, you've got to balance those trade-offs. And I think London's a really good example. Even with the best transport network in the country, you still have to have these measures that disincentivise car use in the most crowded places.
Yeah. Anything else to add?
Yeah, I think you asked, do we know enough? And I think it's two-way. It's the CIHT have made the point around the providers need to understand what the users need, and that's the journeys they make now and the journeys they would make. We know there's a lot of deterrence to taking the job in a certain location if the journey is unpredictable, if it's a public transport journey, is it uncertain, is it comfortable, do we feel safe? That sort of deterrence to journey. So do we know what journeys people do make and what they would make, but also do the people know what exists? I often find people's perception is that public transport is dreadful because finding information about it, because it's not integrated, is poor. So they don't understand, actually, there might be a really good joined up journey option for them, but if they don't know about it, or they don't know where to find it, or even where it is there, Google Maps is the default way of finding your journeys, but it's not very good at, well, you could drive to this part of something and then get the train for most of the journey. Or somebody could drop you off. That's not a thing in Google Maps.
Yeah.
The systems don't work, but actually the private sector's delivered more than we have as the industry delivering it.
And we've got some great examples of that in my rural community, but they take 3 or 4 years to permeate, because that's the only way people find out, is eventually they learn that it actually works, but it's not thanks to any integration measures. And thank you very much. And Damien, anything to add to that?
I think just building on that, there's quite often, someone's car breaks down and they're surprised at the level of service that is available in some of the areas, particularly in rural areas where you've got, you've seen improvements in buses and connections with trains and stuff. So I think sometimes we're not very good at getting the message out about what is actually there. I think also you do get modes that compete against each other quite a bit rather than working together. The train versus the bus, or cycling's the best way. We need to work out a way of how we can bring everybody together to look at it as one system, because sometimes it doesn't feel like that.
Thank you.
Just before we move on to the next question, I just want to pick up on one of the themes that has come through, which is around this, people having to choose to drive because they need to get somewhere. Kate, you've just said sometimes people might drive to a certain location and then get on the train. What thought have you given to the costs of parking at train stations? Because I think often you'll hear a family say, it's too expensive to park at a station for 4 days, so it's easier for us just to drive and park somewhere. Do you think more needs to be done around the cost of parking at these sort of interchange places, so that where people are having to choose to do that, perhaps if they're coming in from a rural area? And Damien, I'm assuming you're familiar with Cranbrook Station, where you can actually park for free just outside Exeter, which does encourage people to use that railway station. What thinking have you had around that? Because it's just something that I've been thinking about recently.
Yes, logistics of parking, accessibility of parking is important, and pricing structure is important, but it needs to not be the only choice. If you don't have a car, that needs to not be the barrier to it. That the people need to be able to have choices. People often do want to travel in a fully sustainable mode. They would rather get a bus to a station, but if like my hometown, the nearest bus stop to the station is a 10-minute walk away. If you can't make that 10-minute walk, that journey isn't accessible. If people want to walk or cycle, but there isn't safe active travel infrastructure to the station, to the interchange at each end, it doesn't matter how good the public transport bit of the journey is, it's the joined upness of it that it doesn't work. So yes, parking is important, and it can be the difference between whether somebody would use the train and also whether it's one person making a journey is very different than whether it's 4 people making a journey, and different things will work for different people, different places. The planning information, as well as the actual ticketing and the pricing and the structure and the delivery of the infrastructure, matters just as much, because if people can't get the information around their own journeys, then they'll drive.
Damien, just bring you in and then I'll bring Jacob in for his next question.
Yeah, I was just going to use another example from our area. So yesterday, my plan was to drive to Tiverton Parkway. I could have driven to a lot nearer stations, but that station is an example where the parking is reasonable, and you get people making longer journeys. From Cornwall, obviously from North Devon and areas, because it is in a good location. It's got good connections on the motorway and such like. So you get people driving long distances to get to that point. I think what we need to do is develop those sustainable options to link into a station like that as well, so that you get that choice, that you don't just have to drive there.
I mean, I think the other challenge is making the journeys more efficient. That's why people drive to that one, because it's a quicker way of doing it. But,
yeah, and it's also when you get onto, you're 2 hours in London then, aren't you? So you're not rattling around all the slower stops and stuff.
Great, thank you. Jacob.
Thanks, Chair. Obviously, joined up journeys are going to look different across the country. I think all of us probably represent different areas where there's different levels of integration themselves. So what would you say that well-integrated transport looks like across urban, suburban areas and rural?
Well, I'll maybe leave Damien to talk about the rural areas, because I do think that's where the more drastic consequences of poor integration are felt, and this connection is super painful there. And I think arguably the mayoral combined authorities are beginning to show signs of thinking about what this really means to users. So things like last bus home guarantees if the final bus is cancelled, and so on. But I think in terms of what it could look like, I mentioned Berlin earlier. So it's West Yorkshire's 2.4 million, Berlin's 3.7 million. They've got over 300 mobility hubs across communities, built into new and old housing projects. We're struggling to get 5 implemented, struggling with the business cases in West Yorkshire. So there's a vision there at scale for what they would like the system to look like and for people to experience. And I think we need to have some vision as to where we're going that's of the right scale. Otherwise, we are going to be making small improvements to the system, important improvements, but I think we need to be a little bit more ambitious than that. And I worry a little bit that we get bogged down in the business case for incremental improvements without really setting out what we want our systems to look like. And I'll perhaps save talking about the tram till later, the evolution.
Can I just ask could you just clarify for the record, and just for anybody that's watching this, what you mean by the mobility hubs in Berlin that you're talking about, and what you're trying to get in?
These
in
are
the UK?
they're kind of focal points for interchange. So they will all have some form of shared car service. Could be a shared van as well. They have shared bike schemes and shared scooters, as well as taxis, and that's also a point of public transport interchange. And then obviously you invest around those to make them visible, waiting areas and so on. So it becomes an obvious part of the system. Everyone can see it. And you know where you need to go if you want to pick something else up. And I think the importance of that approach is that it's also not just about the bus service that's there, because a lot of our services are targeted on the middle of the city, and if you don't want to go to the middle of the city, you need some different sort of options available. So they're making those options obvious to people, so people start to think about, actually, this is a system with lots of different things to it. So that's why I think we could fall short if we don't have that kind of ambition.
So you basically, it really helps with the first and last mile, or in that case, kilometre type
It
issue.
can be the first and last mile, but obviously car clubs and taxis can be doing relatively extensive journeys.
Damien, did you want to come in? Perhaps if you could talk a bit more about rural areas.
Yeah, I think in terms of rural areas, obviously in those areas, the voluntary sector plays a key part for those people that haven't got their own transport, and it's how we link those into the system, and they tend to be governed to towards the sort of helping the frail and the elderly and the people that can't use conventional bus services. But we've got a lot of young people and a lot of other people in rural areas that can't access services, particularly for education. And I think that what some areas have been very successful at demand responsive transport feeding into main networks, with examples like in Lincolnshire, but in a lot of areas that can come at a high cost per passenger. I think when you look at what local authorities spend in rural areas on transport, it is massive. You've got councils with £50 million school transport budgets. If we can integrate all those needs, and I'm including like the requirements for the NHS as well in that, if we can try and work out how we can get that into an integrated network, you may be able to like provide some transport for access to education, and then you've got vehicles available to do things at other parts of the day to feed people into the main bus network. So that's something that is what we in the Transport ACCO promote, and it's what we're always trying to do. But it does come at where you've got people with different levels of responsibility in different organisations. It can sometimes be a barrier to achieving that.
I think I'll comment on more the urban angle there, and I think your point is correct that we've got to think about it differently in different places, different geographies. So I think one aspect of that is realising that in rural areas, car travel for many people will remain the main mode of transport and will remain the best way of getting people around. Now, obviously, there's accessibility through rural bus service provision, but that will inevitably, because of distances, because of how sparse populations are, that will come with a greater cost. I think the focus on urban areas is important for the reasons I've highlighted, that we know that our big cities underperform on connecting people to those economic centres. I think the integration imperative in those places is important too, just because you've got so many different conflicts in terms of space. So, developable land versus giving road space to allow people to get around. You've got lots of different transport modes intersecting there, whether you have local trams, metro, buses, road users, and all those other things. And I think the other distinction to make there is that we have our big cities where we know that transport connectivity is a real constraint. It basically reduces their effective size. They're basically half as big as their population suggests because people can't access those city centres. What that looks like in smaller places, medium-sized cities, you need fewer of those sort of high-capacity transport connections, and actually in those places, buses are really important. Buses are still really important in big places. They kind of fill in the whole network, but if you're thinking about what levers to pull on integrated transport in our kind of medium-sized cities, getting those bus networks filled out is the way to go.
Yeah, integrated transport does mean different things to different people in different places. So you've got rural areas. Chris Whitty talks about coastal areas. If you map deprivation, life expectancy, and access to transport, they all intersect, and that's around not just rural versus urban, but it's around coastal versus other places. Suburban places need different infrastructure from others. So from a return on investment point of view, as well as from an individual access to transport point of view, we do need different things in different places, and that's mixtures of park and ride, responsive transport, different accessible transport, and considering different places in the country as well as different types of places. The nature of integrated transport is different in the north and the south, for example, even within cities and within rural areas.
If I think about my constituency, which is semi-rural, we don't have a mayoral authority. So to your point, Greg, that can often act as a coordinating authority. We obviously don't have that. So there's two towns that are not well connected to each other, and then villages that don't have an integrated transport system. So what programmes or interventions do you think would help for areas like mine that are not metropolitan?
My colleague who I developed the evidence with might be able to provide more detail, but he's been working with the Welsh Government and they're looking at, obviously they have control over rail, and they're taking buses into franchising and thinking very hard about the coordination, these sorts of places. I think franchising doesn't have to just be for the big cities. I think there are real opportunities to lay down a core network of what's the important social and economic function of public transport in those areas, and decide whether the right thing to do is to fund that through a managed franchise set of services. So I think there are models even within the UK of how that can be done differently. Having said that, I think what's been going on in Devon is so there's been some really good coordination of rural transport there. So that's the trouble with the UK system. You can't just design one thing that fits everywhere. There are exceptions that have been shown to work.
Anyway, yeah, Kate?
Just one other thing to remember is we're going to get, with local government reorganisation, a large number of new transport authorities, and if you split a county level organisation into multiple unitaries, you split what might already be a very small team into very small individual areas. So one of the things that's really important, CIHT is keen that we have that planning at a larger than individual highway authority level, whether it's public transport, active travel facilities, more boundaries, more cross-boundary journeys. So that wider high-level planning is more efficient and more effective in supporting joined-up journeys.
I'd just like to add to that point with local government reorganisation. That's why it's so key that those boundaries kind of match local economic geographies. You don't want boundary splitting areas where there's a lot of cross movement between people, whether it's for work or just local journeys. And so that, combined with what we've seen with the bus services bill, which will make things like franchising much easier in those local authorities, that will begin that kind of matching between governance on the transport network, allowing places to make those decisions with the network in mind. And if they decide that it is important to have those connections there, maybe that wouldn't be provided by deregulated bus services, then that is their prerogative and they can do that.
Just bring in Damien, and then that's the end of my questions.
Yeah, I think it's just picking up on those points about local government reorganisation. If it's not thought through, you could be in a position where you're breaking up integrated transport units that cover all aspects of passenger transport and links in with highways. And I think the greater number of boundaries, the greater the fragmentation of services. But you have got an opportunity with the combined authorities to look at things at a higher level that crosses over those boundaries. But you've got to be careful that anything that's left responsible still with the local council, that you can still retain that integration, because that obviously provides better services for people, and it saves significant amounts of money as well.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Ollie.
Thank you, Chair. A lot of the evidence we've received, and indeed it's come up in the conversation so far, has emphasised the need to put transport users at the centre of the design and delivery of integrated transport, and of making sure that we engage those users and design the integrated transport networks to meet the needs of the communities that they're intended to serve. What does that look like in practice, would you say, in terms of putting users first? And are there examples of good practice of doing that, whether here or abroad? I mean, we've said a little bit about Berlin already, but let's start with Mr. Jones down the line.
I think it's really important to engage with those users, and obviously it's sort of done on a national level, but locally, I think it's engaging with like the youth council and getting the young people that because they're for us, they're the most active in terms of wanting to see improvements in sustainable transport. It's also looking at communities on an individual basis and what those needs are. And I think what we don't want to do is design services and then tell them that's what they need. It's what they want, and then we will get better options. So I think there are pockets of good practice around the country around where that's happening. And I think it's also important to engage with those major providers of services, so like the health sector, the education sector, the business sector as well, so that you're matching the two together. because there's a lot of journeys that take place that if those services had been planned better to start with, you might have been able to have more sustainable transport options.
Okay. Kate, go to you next.
Yes, it's both the organisational structures that deliver it, so that, and the physical infrastructure that's there. So you get that. So that's what delivers the seamless and reliable, or simple, accessible journeys. That people's actual, the lived experience is about how the change actually works. And if it's focused on the user rather than deliver in health infrastructure, sort of a lot of health providers will joke about, people think hospitals run better if you just get rid of the patients. We do sometimes kind of think like
yes,
that.
Minister episode along those lines, I think.
It would run better if you could just get rid of the people who are travelling. We do tend to often organise things based on our own operation rather than being user-focused, and if it is user-focused, it will meet the needs of all people in all situations at all times. If you work in hospitality and you're finishing at 11 o'clock at night, the fact there are no bus routes means there's no option. So it does need to be all of those things, including the proportion of people with disabilities is much bigger than we think, and it's not just wheelchair users, it's all the different dimensions of things, and that the seamlessness needs to work for all those people. If you arrive at your bus stop, it doesn't matter if there's real-time passenger information, this is real-time if you can't access it virtually.
I'd add to that, the best way to align user needs and your integrated transport network is through governance and accountability, and that's exactly what we see in the mayoral-led transport systems. I'll take Greater Manchester as an example. I've seen sort of internal analysis from them saying the most important thing for their residents in terms of how their transport system functions is, does their bus turn up on time? Is it reliable? Can they count on that? And part of the reason they're doing, actually looking into user needs is because if users are not happy with their transport system, they get to go to the ballot box in those local mayoral elections and make their voices heard. And so if you want to align those incentives, having that sort of accountability, that democratic accountability over the level of where the transport network is operational, really helps. And then that allows the mayor to make decisions on, okay, what kind of concessions should we have on our network to improve accessibility for certain groups. You can make local level decisions over bus fares rather than, say, a national cap. You could decide, well, we think bus travel is even more important in our place, so we're going to lower that cap / in another scenario where actually, no, we need the funding to reinvest in our local system, so we want fares above the cap. So just making all those decisions, at a political level will help align those user needs.
Yeah, I'll go back to maybe my first statistic. Only 7% of people make joined-up journeys or multimodal journeys, at least at the moment. So in the work we're doing in the Infuse project, which I run, we're looking at building these visions with a wide range of different community groups, working with schools, and some of the things which emerge, some of which are kind of known to us, but perhaps marginalised in the way that the companies have been thinking about profit rather than social value. Personal safety for a wide range of groups, particularly women, but also younger people and other minority groups, comes out as so important to whether people are willing to spend time in places moving between different forms of transport. So that is, to me, really critical. But people also talked about so we see interchange as a time penalty. That's how transport thinks about it as economists. Like, people don't like waiting. Well, people talk to us about why is interchange not sort of more integrated in the stuff that we need to do anyway. So we can do other activities while we're there, or children talked about it being a place we're going to spend some time. Well, why is it not more fun? And I think you can see things like LNER have just done 2 family-friendly rooms, one in York, I think the other one's in London. Like, well, that could be standard practice, right? That this is how we do interchange. This is not unpleasant. This is something that's actually we're encouraging people to do. Dutch Railways, I find their kind of interchanges a little bit clean and clinical, but they've got like a standard design approach to it so that everyone understands how it all works. And I know we've got local character in our different stations. That would be one one thing we could do. And I would just echo Kate's point that we aren't, because of our infrastructure, going to be able to serve everyone equally, but I think working out ways in which we can make the experience more equitable for people with disabilities. I really like the signing in rail stations that you see on the rail signs. Why is that not on all of our bus stops? So let's make those innovations happen across the whole system again, so it feels like one system, not rail, and then I'm going to something else, which is the bus network.
Damien Jones, anything to add briefly? Got your hand up, I've noticed.
You're on mute.
Sorry, it was doing my hand and the mute at the same time. It was just in relation to a lot of things that are happening nationally around transport poverty as well, and there's some work that's taking place in a lot of areas looking to identify solutions relevant to geography, demographics and infrastructure, and it's looking at it from that perspective as well to see how we can help those groups that are impacted by transport poverty. And it's also giving the tools to be able to help people that may need that additional support to use transport in a sustainable way, for example, through independent travel training and all those kinds of things, to give people the confidence to be able to travel on the network.
Great. Thank you. Have you done? Brilliant. Alex, on to you.
Thank you, Chair. We've already touched on this to some extent in terms of the UK's transport infrastructure. What are the practical things we need to do to make sure that UK transport infrastructure supports better joined-up journeys? Please start. Kate, because you've mentioned it already.
Yeah, for it to be built up, it needs to be meeting all of those needs, the individual's mobility, the information, the availability, the planning, and across the different modes, giving those sort of practical, real opportunities, or it won't be getting that return on the investment. And I think we forget sometimes the wider impacts, economic growth, about air quality, about noise, about that has an impact on whether people will choose to make journeys by different modes.
I think what I'd say on that is, if you think about improving your transport networks, you can make things bigger. You can do sort of big ticket infrastructure expansions. I think what integration is more about is just making what you have better. And that's not to say that it doesn't require any infrastructure. Of course it does, but it's a relatively infrastructure light intervention that you can do to sort of really get the most out of your transport networks. Now, for things like, a big aspect of improving transport in big cities is increasing bus frequencies and reliabilities, and that, when they come under public control, as all our big cities are doing, and Manchester has already done, that will require more buses and things like local ownership of depots. But I think on the infrastructure side, it makes integration quite a good intervention to do in the short term, because you're going to be spending less on infrastructure than your headline grabbing let's build a new tram kind of interventions.
I guess I'm trying to find out what we actually physically need. I mean, I remember in a previous life being told that there was this brand new shining mobility hub, a phrase I hate, and having kind of dug down on it a bit further, it appeared to be a bus stop plus a puncture repair kit, which I'm sure Ollie would be pleased about, the puncture repair kit alongside this bus stop. But it didn't really feel like, a brave new world of transport integration. So what are those practical things that we should be doing to create these places where people will be changing from one type of transport to another?
I think it can be those relatively boring interventions. It's bus stops, it's making people feel safe, it's unified branding across the place so people know that they're on a network and can use different modes. I don't think it has to be particularly eye-catching on that front.
I mean, I think we risk overlooking an opportunity to invest in parts of our local communities and suburbs. Like when York got the e-scooter trial, they had an opportunity to rethink, like, okay, in our suburbs, we're putting these e-scooters there, we're putting them around local shops, let's invest in raising up that area and make this a focal point of that. Instead, what we did was we allowed them to chuck some scooters along the side of an already tired bus stop. I mean, that to me isn't a mobility hub. That's just, you know, giving a bit of pavement space over to someone. So I think there are kind of investment needs there. But probably the thing that for me is most of an investment opportunity. Most of our multimodal journeys that do happen are walk, rail or walk bus. And if you look at other countries, there's an awful lot of bike rail or bike tram kind of journeys. We did a study of 3 corridors in Greater Manchester and West Yorkshire, and only 2 of the stations had really secure, lockable, kind of well-lit cycle storage facilities. Some of the other cycle storage was done to standard, but you could see that people felt it was risky to leave their bikes there. And then when you walked within a mile of the station, the cycle infrastructure was not properly integrated. Like, there's no point in having great bike storage if the network to the station isn't right. So there are some investments, and I think that is the sort of thing that, you know, is within our powers to do better. So if we have a clarity of plan and purpose, then we should be aiming for that. But those things aren't free either. So. Yeah.
Thank you. Damien?
Yeah, I think it doesn't tend to be the exciting stuff, but there's a lot of little things that can be done around an area to improve those that infrastructure, you know, through councils with the bus service improvement plan, by putting better bus shelters in where they were and where they weren't before, by looking at how you can create those hubs for people to cycle, walk to. There is you know, when you're trying to provide transport for people, there is a lot of resistance on that journey from the home to the bus stop. People want to get in their car and get to that point. So anything you can do that improves the safety and the confidence. And I think for that bigger infrastructure, it also comes back to what I was saying earlier about when you're creating those new developments, that you build those in at the start, and that you've got that opportunity for putting in the infrastructure that people can use.
Great, thank you. So we've looked at physical infrastructure. Can we now go on to technology and what kind of role technology can play in better facilitating integrated transport? So let's start with Robert for a change.
Sure. So ticketing is obviously a big one if you're thinking about multimodal journeys, and a lot of our research looks at, okay, what are the journeys that people would take on their usual commute, say within big city centres, and so you know, ease of use and seamless transition are a big part of that. If you're messing around with lots of different tickets for different modes, if you have to sort of pre-book them online beforehand, if you can't just tap in, tap out, that's an issue. And then similarly but separately, it's about cost of those tickets. If taking multiple modes just adds on cost, then that can become prohibitive for some people. It's having the sort of technical infrastructure in place to, you know, cap fares, say, and these are the powers that our city region mayors are starting to have and are starting to wield, because they realise, looking at it from a whole network perspective, these are the kind of interventions that make sense when you think about it at that level.
Thank you. Greg?
Yeah, just on ticketing, I think totally agree that that can be a route to kind of a more seamless pattern of travelling. But we have to ask, how are we integrating the fares that sit behind that? Because the rail and bus fares within the systems that we've got are not well aligned at the moment. So are we levelling up the cost to have a common fare for both modes of transport, or are we bringing that down? That comes with a cost. Like, simplifying how we pay is not the same as simplifying what we pay, and so I think these details really matter to your inquiry. I mean, it's personal bugbear, but tap on and tap off, can we just make this really obvious to people how it works? I don't understand how it works on the buses in my area. I've got 2 degrees in this stuff. And the role of sort of AI and so on, I think we need to know what the purpose of integration is in order to help, for technology to be able to help us deliver that. I would rather AI is focused on improving our service design in the first place. People want stuff that's simple and works. They don't want AI to be working on an algorithm to tell them how to deal with how stuff, when it goes wrong. Okay, sometimes things do go wrong, but we need to focus on making the system work more of the time, first time for people, so they have a good experience.
Thank you. I agree with you on the tap on, tap off, because also you don't know whether there's the tap off bit of it, because in many places it's just tapping on. Right, on to Damien.
We've done some work at sort of the Peninsula Strategic Transport Board on how we can get integrated ticketing, and that obviously links with the project Coral for local bus, but we also want to extend that to local rail. But it feels like it's taken a long time to get to that point. I feel that the technology is potentially there to be able to do it, because it happens in areas, when you go to London and etc. But I don't know. We just don't seem to be able to get to the point of being able to introduce it, and we need to break down what those barriers are, because there are opportunities there, because we've seen where we've put improved bus servicing connecting with trains. The Oakhampton line in Devon is a good example. The bus that connects with that, the patronage has gone up 65%. So people want to do that, and if you can make the integrated ticketing work as well, you'll get more people using it.
Thank you, Kate.
I think to make it user focused, it's about the understandability of the system. So that's understanding the ticket prices, what restrictions there are on which tickets you can use when. If this train isn't running, can use a different train between different operators and between modes. Between rail and bus. Rail networks are helpful in the sense that the infrastructure is fixed, so that makes it more understandable. But what we've seen in London Transport's done well of showing using rail model of maps for buses. People understand a bus route and where it goes to and from if they see what looks like a rail map. Outside London, you almost never see a map at a bus stop, for example. And if somebody is thinking, should I get the bus in town, or shall I get a taxi, or shall I walk, or shall I drive? If the network is understandable, if public transport is understandable, they're more likely to use it. And also that's connection with different areas, because we know it. Once people make a journey and discover it's workable, they're more likely to make it. They're more likely to take a job in a place where they've got a different opportunity to get to education, to get to employment. We know this is why rural life expectancy is worse than in urban areas, because transport is the difference. But if people don't see a way of accessing it, and that's about the understanding of the information, they don't start accessing it. And those online platforms need to work across boundaries, across authorities. It needs to be a higher level than an individual highway authority or transport authority.
So just thinking about data specifically, we've had so far a mention of Google Maps, which probably is the most kind of integrated we've got at the moment, though I take your point that it doesn't add in the driving plus the public transport. You have to choose either or. What are there data barriers at the moment to making these kind of things better? Is it, are we missing data? Is it not in the right format? What kind of barriers are there? And also, I worry about the geography point, in that there are lots of different apps being developed all over the place. There was a question asked of the Department for Transport, who very helpfully said that they didn't maintain a complete list of all of these apps that were under development. So it seems quite likely you could be using one app at your starting place, then presumably you're using the Great British Railway one, and then you end up in a completely different town and you have to download another one, which doesn't feel to me an ideal integrated, joined up journey. So what kind of geography do you think these technological platforms should be trying to cover?
If you want the city's perspective.
Well, to kick off on the data point, I think with the coming together of rail and bus under public control, the possibility of sharing data across those platforms is easy, or easier. I think where we've got issues are things like the wider mobility system, so your e-scooters and e-bikes, car clubs. These are not public systems. They've got their own GDPR regulations. They've got their own profitability concerns, and I think integrating data across those services with the kind of bus rail system is going to remain quite challenging to do. There are some examples in, I think in Seattle in the US where the government said, well, if you want to operate services on the public highway, then these are the requirements that you have to share this type of data with us. I mean, public authorities don't need to have access to all of that data, but for planning purposes, it would be great to know roughly where the origins and destinations are so that we can start to see where the other opportunities are to join things up. And so I think we can write those into contracts. It is the public highway that these systems are using. So I would focus on that.
Damien?
Yeah, I think we should not be all developing our own, which is, I think, where there's a tendency to do it. We should be trying to use those national platforms that are already available. And in the Southwest, we invest heavily in Travel Line, which gives bus and rail information, and with bus open data as well. The information is out there, and people can develop things. So it almost feels like we're making it a bit too complicated than it needs to be. I think the opportunity and the technology is there to be able to do it.
Kate?
Yeah, I think the people who are confident in using apps on phones, on tablets in the home and planning a journey and while making a journey, will be comfortable doing that. Even for them, it's critical those things join up. It's around they know which modes, which time of day, how many people are travelling, and so on. It might be a question of joining up things that exist. Rather than creating new things. That if you have a one-stop shop that takes you into where are you going to and from, and how many people are travelling, and what time are you travelling, is more helpful. It's the Google Maps analogy that asks you when you're travelling, do you have a fixed start or arrival, departure or arrival time, and then you choose a stream, so it doesn't join between the streams well. But we need to remember not everybody has accessibility of devices. Ironically, sometimes people with disabilities have more access. People saw Chris McCausland's programme recently talking about use of digital devices for transport, and he uses data on devices more than many people I know who are sighted, because he doesn't have access to some of the other things that we're using, so people plan in different ways. But people shouldn't have to have different platforms for different people in different situations. They need a one-stop shop into something wherever they are in the country, whatever mode they're using. And I think it's joining up of systems that's going to be more relevant than trying to create new things.
Thank you. Robert?
Yeah, on the data point, Damien mentioned the Bus Open Data Service. There is a lot of data out there, and it's free and it's accessible, very comprehensive, pretty hard to use, and I'm speaking from my own experience there. So I think the data question is more, do, say, local transport authorities or other organisations have the capacity to use it, and maybe there's something there to think about how it's published and packaged there. So I think in terms of data volume, we're fine, we're in a good place. On the geography point, I think I'd like to push back slightly in that I think there is a position for, say, different apps, different systems for different levels of geography. I think it just requires quite a clear division of what kind of services are we looking at. For instance, GBR app or system for, say, intercity rail, but as soon as you get into Manchester, you then go onto their, say, local rail network. I mean, I don't think it would make sense to put all TfL services on, say, a GB rail app. And I think it's the point that there are different transport journeys that serve different functions. There's transport journeys to get you around cities, which will have lots of regular users, and so having a system there that focuses just on that economic geography on that city and it is consistent within that has benefits. And it's not that everything's locked away on an app. That can be their own sort of ticketing systems, ticket offices, ticket machines, or even just tap on, tap off, so you don't have to worry about that stuff too much if you're if you're reassured that you're not going to be charged through the nose because it's within a system, whereas that intercity journey, I think there is value in splitting that out onto a separate thing. That's not to say that we should proliferate it across everything, but especially in our big cities where you've got these big integrated transport networks, I think there is scope to do something different there.
Thank you. That's it.
Great, okay. I'm going to bring Lawrence in briefly on this as well, if that's okay.
Thank you very much, Chair. Good morning. I just wanted to pick up on Alex's question about gaps in data and information, because we've heard as a committee in other areas that there are important gaps between modes. For example, that we know much more about rates of instances of harassment on trains than we do on buses, for example. So thinking, I suppose, about in two parts, any data which is collected at the moment which isn't shared but may be useful, and then data actually which it would be reasonable and practicable to obtain but just isn't collected at all. I just invite anyone who wishes to come in if there are particular types of information that you'd like to name for us that you think would be useful for integration that does come under one of those two categories.
Don't all jump at once.
I think in terms of there's two bits of the piece. It's the what are the nature of the issues, as you say, understanding the ways in which people are affected. So harassment or fearfulness of in public places, we know is a huge barrier to transport. We tend not to measure it. Caroline Criado-Perez wrote about it in Invisible Women, which was 10 years ago. She flagged a lot of sources of information, but noted there are things we don't know. She noted that we know people are fearful around their own characteristics around age, younger and older, around disability, around gender, around sexual orientation, ethnicity, and so on. The intersectionality of those things is even more important. If you're not just older or female or disabled, but you're an older female disabled person, knowing how that affects people's transport decisions, I think, is a huge issue. And then recognising that in the integrated transport is a separate thing. And I think they're both things that we need.
Thank you very much. So moving on to a general question, and there might be some follow-ups depending on time and how we do. This will be addressed to the full panel, I think starting with Mr. Jones and then moving back to witnesses in the room, starting with Professor Marsden. And before I ask, I should let you know as well that there will be a separate question a bit later about modal shift in respect of cars. So the question is for yourselves, what are the main benefits that integrated transport could deliver? And again, I think we're particularly interested in benefits that can be demonstrated, whether that's through quantification or through another means. Mr. Jones.
I think the main there's a number of benefits, but the benefits I can think of from the work environment that I'm in is around cost. I think if you've got an integrated transport network, I think it can actually reduce the cost of providing statutory services, for example, for access to education or access to health. There is obviously a benefit on the users themselves in journey times. I think there's also a benefit in terms of reducing congestion, reducing pollution, and we see the impact of when things go wrong every day, and it would just free up so much time if the system worked to be able to further improve things. I don't know if that's too wider thing to say, but it's there is a lot of time picking up on when things don't work at the moment. We need to turn that around to concentrate on getting things better and then being able to improve things. We're reacting a lot of the time rather than being able to be proactive.
Thank you. And then moving to our panel in the room.
Yeah, I think the opportunity to better link to wider objectives, so to be able to link to employment sites, healthcare, to particular social needs. We've known that that's something we should be doing more. It's just been very difficult to do anything about it within the system that we've had. So I think integration should open up opportunities for a lot of people who aren't able to make those, just aren't able to participate in those sorts of activities at the moment. I think that's going to be the earlier win than the mode shift that we'll come on to later.
I'll talk about the economic benefits, and we've quantified this in some work we did looking at what if you took steps to integrate transport in England's biggest cities outside of London, specifically the city regions that have mayors and have these greater transport powers and can do these things as it stands. And so that would mean taking the network that you have and making it better, increasing bus frequencies on underserved routes, better integration between bus and train, and speeding up journey times through road powers. And what we look at is that if you took those steps, you could get 1.2 million more people into these big city centres within a reasonable 30-minute journey. That's an additional impact on what we already have. That's about a third increase in connectivity for all these cities. Brings them much more in line with European standards in terms of connectivity to city centres. And what that means is, because you're increasing the effective size of labour markets, you're better matching workers to employees, that could potentially have £17 billion in additional productivity benefits for the national economy, which is why I think the integrated transport question is most important in our big cities from an economic perspective.
Thank you.
Yeah, so journey time is critical, but journey time reliability is also critical in thinking about benefits. We tend to skew prediction of benefits, both in choosing what schemes we do and prioritising them, by car transport. So we can, as transport modellers, we can consider the journey time and the value of the journey time of pedestrians and cyclists, but in the main we don't, because we're not required to. We can consider the mortality and morbidity benefits of active travel. We know 1 in 6 deaths is caused by primarily by inactivity. We know it's an £8 billion plus cost of physical inactivity, and yet we don't actually price the benefits of active travel in most schemes. We tend to segregate things. We say this thing's a congestion scheme, this thing's a public transport scheme, this thing's a walking cycling scheme. But actually every transport intervention affects all aspects. And if we took a bigger picture about what does good look like in the economic sense, we would take different decisions. So pricing all the modes, pricing all the people, we know that keeping people mobile in later life improves their life expectancy, the quality of their health. We know that older people are an immense part of an economy. They look after grandchildren. That 1 in 5 grandparents is looking after grandchildren every week on multiple days, enabling people to work. The cost of the economy of that is largely ignored. But if those people can't travel, whether it's being kept safely driving and access to other modes, that has an enormous aspect of the economy. And CRC is very keen that we have that bigger picture of transport benefits and impact on people. If we priced everything, we would take completely different decisions about what we do and how we allocate money.
That point about walking and cycling modelling, not taking into account journey time savings is really interesting. Is that a factor under the DFT's modelling?
It is. So the changes to the Green Book change to how we forecast benefits and monitor them. We tend to do more forecasting than monitoring. So if we don't monitor what happened, we make false assumptions about outcomes. We know building road capacity has very short-term benefits, and it's much shorter-term benefits than we tend to assume. That Professor Metz at UCL has shown that we grossly overstate the duration of the benefits, which means we skew the balance of cost and benefits to schemes, so the things we choose are not the things that actually deliver the best return on investment.
And I suppose the benefits that you've described, and I think Mr. Johnson in particular described, are wider economic benefits. Is there any evidence about direct economic benefits for the transport users. So we're thinking about the upfront cost, which is often required from investment in integrated transport. Is there any scope for price reductions then to follow from greater efficiencies arising from integration, or good examples of the costs of fares, for example, being reduced as a result of integration?
I'd say yes, potentially. I think part of that is down to if you have an integrated system across different modes, you're going to increase connectivity. That's going to benefit your local economy, put more money in local people's pockets, and then raise their standards of living. I think the aspect on the fare side is obviously that's a decision for the local transport authority based on their assessment of how do we want to encourage use of transport relative to other modes, but also if you bring all those modes under one system, you can do things such as cross-subsidization, where if it was, say, a sort of deregulated offering, that might mean that they focus only on the most profitable routes, leading to overservice on those at the expense of maybe less profitable routes, but are still important from the wider network. We see that in the case of London, the more profitable arm of the system in the tube cross-subsidises the buses, and there's more scope for that when you bring in integration in these other urban areas.
Moving on slightly, we've heard about good examples of integration being done well, both in the UK and internationally. We've also heard evidence that bringing different modes together in one point in time and space isn't enough. Are there any examples of integration projects being done badly that you'd like to draw to our attention? And what are the main lessons to be learned from failure?
Well, I'll maybe start with a concern I have about the approach to integration that we're taking with the decision to delay the tram in West Yorkshire. So we've had 5 years of commitment at high level across different political parties that West Yorkshire is a sufficiently large economy to be really missing some form of integrated mass rapid transit. We've had 5 years of strategic planning to deliver that, and then it's put under review, which kicks it back another couple of years, which means we're not going to be seeing it until the late 2030s. So in a sense, if we've got agreement that there's a key strategic need, then we can't really call it integrated planning if we can't get agreement across scales about how we're going to deliver something which is a significant economic area within the country. So, I mean, that's one example for me of us not joining up our decision-making, support, funding and devolution processes to support what everyone, I think, would agree is the kind of integrated outcome that we're aiming for. I mean, nobody's thrown the whole thing in the bin, but it's just an example of overcomplicating what appears to be a commitment.
Thank you very much. And that's what Mr. Jones has indicated as well. Oh, you're still on mute, I'm afraid.
Sorry, I think it's not necessarily that things are done badly, but it's so difficult to achieve some things, particularly, there's examples we've got in our organisation of trying to introduce bus priority, but there's such resistance to be able to do that, which may that when it gets to be introduced, it's watered down, and where you started off maybe with a 24-hour plan for a 24-hour bus lane, it ends up being something that's just a couple of hours at peak times, which is then open for more abuse, and the transport planners that are trying to introduce these things, and you go out to consultation and you do all those kinds of things, they get a lot of abuse as well from trying to introduce these measures from online and in other forums as well, and it just makes trying to get anything like that really difficult to do.
Thank you very much. So final question from me is the modal shift question. I'm conscious of time, so please don't feel the need for everyone to come in on this question unless you feel compelled to do so. But the question is, would a focus on providing more joined-up journeys encourage modal shift and potentially reduce car use? And if so, how and how good is the evidence for that shift?
I'll start with the reasons why it will. People find moving between different forms of transport much more painful than they do sitting on them. So they, the cost to them of being at an interchange can be two plus times the cost of being on the bus. So if you make that interchange feel safer, feel easier to move through, feel more reliable and trustworthy, then it reduces, there's evidence that it reduces the pain that they feel, and therefore they're more likely to make that journey, and therefore it will be more competitive relative to a whole range of alternatives, including the car. So it's not going to be transformational for everything, but that's one thing. And I would say the other thing to focus on is those long distance opportunities to connect into rail. So I talked earlier about the poor quality of bike rail interchange. If you can get that right, you're taking long distance car trips off the network. So that's also a prize that other countries have got better than we have.
And just on the international angle, it's sometimes claimed that people in Europe are more likely to be willing to make those interchanges than in the UK. Does that have a ring of truth to you, and is that as a result of better integration to start with, or are there wider factors at play?
I think my favourite example is Vienna, which had a €365 pass for the year, which you could use rail, bus, metro, but they also integrated it with their land use and their parking restraint policies. It looks like a duck, it walks like a duck, and it sounds like a, So, I think it's just that you can point to these places which have put all these things together. It does work.
Thank you. And Mr. Johnson?
Yeah, I think the answer is yes up to a point. So you can improve the network through integration, which will encourage modal shift, but you have to have the stick with the carrot. And, our modelling shows that if you increase connectivity in places like Leeds and Sheffield, still half of those people you better connect will likely drive because they have access to a car, and it is significantly quicker for them to drive. And, you've got to have that. It's integration as a whole package across public transport and private transport, and recognising the trade-offs there. If you want to encourage modal shift, you have to disincentivize car use as well, and you have to, I guess, be politically brave, like we've seen in London, to reduce that congestion, which then goes on to benefit your public transport further.
So just to be absolutely sure, when you say a stick, you're talking about measures like congestion charging, workplace parking levers?
Exactly, and things like that, and ultra-low emissions there.
Thank you, Chair.
Great, thank you. I'm going to jump us to question 9.
Thank you.
I'm conscious you haven't asked anything, so I'm going
to... I do have a couple of follow-ups, which we'll very quickly get out of the way and I'll move on to a question. So Kate, I was really interested in your point about walking and cycling not being valued in the same way. There's something strange happening to us when we get in our car and that we expect the whole transport system to be designed around us, but it seems like that's exactly what the DFT thinks as well. So do other countries evaluate the benefits to walking and cycling? So is there something we can just lift and drop into the UK?
Yes, certainly continental countries and increasingly in the US, all of the impacts of transport are monetised, both in forecasting and choosing interventions, whether it's built infrastructure or the joined-upness of systems, and in measuring benefits. So if we build cycle infrastructure but nobody uses it, we've got an output but no outcome. But if we're not measuring, nobody knows whether we've got an output or whether we've got an outcome. So the system at the moment in the UK permits it but doesn't require it. And we know what gets measured gets done. If you don't require it to get measured, it doesn't get done. So that's why we see that disparity. And the same in the wider aspect of safety in journeys. We know that most injuries walking and cycling don't get measured. That's a deterrent to travel, but we don't include it. Trips, slips and falls on footways aren't included in road traffic collisions, so it doesn't get measured.
Yeah, that's something we talk about in Edinburgh, actually. Part of our road safety strategy is that we couldn't really quantify all those trips and falls in a way. Yeah, that's good. And so, Greg, a couple of times you've talked about proportion of multimodal journeys and unimodal journeys. You make unimodal sound like it's a bad thing. I mean, I walked in here this morning. You're not going to force me to split my journey into multimodal, are you?
No, I think the statistics show like 7% of people use more than one what they call significant mode on a journey.
What is that mode then? Because I assume it's not me walking from my house front door down to my car and my drive.
There's a length of journey that you have to make for it to count as being multimodal. So yeah, if you get out your car and you walk from the car to the door of wherever it is you're going, and that wouldn't count as being multimodal. So what the statistics show is that most of the journeys where we move from one mode to another are walking to bus or walking to train, and I think that's just important to understand when we look at like the integration statistics. Yeah. What do we mean? Are we trying to make people be able to do more bus rail, or is it bus? What are we integrating here? And most of the journeys that we make at the moment are either walk to bus or walk to rail, or they might be certainly in London, tube would be people would be doing two different journeys. But that's much more difficult in somewhere like Leeds or West Yorkshire. You're much less likely to be rail and then bus connectivity in the journey. Those are just fewer.
So, what proportion of those unimodal journeys are just people who are walking? Because there's a vast number of trips every day are just people walking.
In the very short journeys, it's the overwhelming majority. I'd have to look the exact statistic up, but most of the kind of under 1 mile journeys are walked, and even in 2 miles, it's quite a substantial amount, and then it kind of tails off.
Good, that gives me hope. So right, everything we do as a committee, we come across accessibility as being an issue, and I think the government hopes that for some of the issues people with disabilities face when using public transport, integrating transport is going to help with that. So is integrated transport necessarily more accessible for people? I'm looking at you, Kay, I don't know why.
So it can be, but at present it isn't. And it varies around the country. So physical accessibility of buses and trains varies, but it comes back to this point about reliability and confidence and information. So you have to give advance information to the rail operator that you want to travel on a certain service if you need assistance, but if your train is delayed, there is no system for the person on the train to now tell the operator of the next train they're getting on that your train is delayed and you will need assistance. It's the joined upness in all the integration of those. So the little things having huge impact, it's drop curbs and accessible crossings to get to and from the start of the journey. That in many ways is the biggest thing in accessibility for many people who are older and or with disabilities, including people with small children, prams, pushchairs and so on. So yes, the modes of public transport are often accessible. Taxis aren't always accessible. And then the links of, if you're getting a rail journey and you need a taxi at the other end, will there be an accessible taxi available at the time you're arriving? All those things are deterrents, and if people have the choice of a private car, they're more likely to use it, even if they don't really want to.
Yeah, we've had a few conversations here about the accessibility of taxis, etc. It's been an ongoing theme. And of course, people having to pre-book onto a train because they've got a disability isn't good either. So what about ticketing then? So I'm guessing that through ticketing is good for accessibility. But if I had a visual impairment, is there apps available for me to book my ticket at all? I'm guessing the answer is no. I'm looking at you, Robert. I don't know why.
So from a bus point of view, contactless payment, which is the default mode of paying, actually is more accessible because everybody can use it. That pretty much everybody with any disability who is travelling will have access to a contactless bank card.
From a joined-up journey, though, if I'm buying a single ticket for...
In terms of buying single ticket, it doesn't join up, and that matters for trip chaining. So in London, if you make a second bus journey within an hour of the first journey, the second journey is free. That is a huge benefit from accessibility, and it actually disproportionately benefits women more than men, because women make more multi-trip chain journeys. But if you're limited from an accessibility point of view, you might have fewer choices. So, the joined-upness is a problem, but it affects you even more disproportionately because some of the options that might have been available to other people aren't available to you. So, as far as I'm aware, there is no integrated system for combining your shared ride e-scooter, hire scooter, with your bus ticket, with your rail ticket, with your bus by a different operator.
That's the objective, though, isn't it? Is to get to that place, and making that accessible is a real challenge, actually, isn't it? Okay.
And it gives people confidence. If they don't have confidence or certainty, they're less likely to do it.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. I'm going to bring in Jacob now on aligning transport with land use planning.
Yes, so just in terms of transport planning and land use, how do you think this could be better integrated, and how can transport be embedded as part of the planning process? Are there any recommendations that you have for doing that? Kate, would you like to start?
Yes, the most of the infrastructure we have is existing, so improving the things we've got existing are important, but within developments the planning and integration of that is important. One of the concerns CIHT's got is around large numbers of small developments, each individually not making contribution to a joined-up sustainable system. If 100 developments each deliver 50 houses, each of those developments is having a small impact on transport, but together they're having a huge impact. And we need that connectivity. And we note, obviously, changing the transport planning platform, the National Planning Policy Framework and so on. They need to reflect the fact that even the smallest developments have an impact on transport, and it needs to be sustainable, and we need to have developments built that give people genuine choices over travel. At the moment, there's a presumption in favour of development, and that's tending to lead to ever more unsustainable transport. So planning authorities need to have that control, but it needs a bigger picture. Again, cross-boundary. As we get more and more authorities, that those decisions run across boundaries as well.
I think so you're right to say that planning should be aligned with transport, integrated transport. I think the key measure there is aligning powers at the same geography, because then, for instance, in our city regions, you can do transport planning at the same time as spatial planning, house building, commercial space, etc. I think if we think about, again, what does transport do? It connects people to opportunities. How do you sort of increase the reach of that? We've talked about making things better, making things bigger. You can bring people closer to the network is another way to increase the number of people within that catchment, and you do that through spatial planning. If those power, for instance, if a mayor has transport powers at the same time as spatial planning powers, like we see in the London plan, then you can align those developments and get the most out of your transport network. Bringing more people within reach of public transport stops makes that more viable. You're also increasing the size of your labour market. You're giving people more opportunities to travel further within a similar amount of time. And so, and there are ways at the local level, you can focus development around transport stops, things like local development orders. You see things in France, places like Lille, where they've really focused on, okay, you need this level of density around transport stops. There's also scope to, say, release greenbelt land around stations that are well connected to city centres, which preserves most of the greenbelt, but actually increases by a lot the number of people within that catchment.
Yeah, I think we need to be a bit firmer with what we're doing with our development planning. Like, there are some developers who build good development that really get this and integrate it, but there's a lot of basically rubbish car-dependent development being built that has no chance of enabling an integrated solution in the future because of the way the streets are designed. They're not going to be running bus services to it. I've got an example near me where there's a car club, brilliant, but it's right on the edge of the development. There's no lighting around it. It's like an orphan car in the corner. So I think the integrated national transport strategy has to address this, and we have to look at how can we develop models that enable us to build housing at pace, but that build this integrated thinking into those housing decisions. It happens in on the continent. It happens in Sweden. They put the investment in the public transport first and build out around that. Can we think of partnership models where we deliver that with developers and take some of the land value uplift that comes back from it? There must be solutions to this that don't mean we're in a battle of, well, if you want the integrated transport, we'll never be able to sell the homes at those prices, so we won't build them. I mean, that kind of, we've got to get beyond that debate, I feel.
Damien?
Yeah, just from a practical example of what we face is that transport competes with lots of other areas when a new development's being built, and it's quite often the case that it will be should the developer invest in a community hub, or should they invest in transport? And we see cases where transport goes through the SIL process. There's a lot of capital investment, but what transport requires, particularly for local bus, is revenue funding, so that you can pump prime services at the start while developments are taking shape, and then in time, if it's a deregulated network, it becomes commercially viable, or if it's franchised, it costs less to run that service, and we see that we quite often not getting that funding through to be able to put those transport options in place at the start of the process. Which makes a difference then to how people travel.
Great. I'll bring Steph in.
And just very briefly, train stations are expensive, but bus hubs with some parking, comparatively cheap. Do we need special new provision in land use and planning to be able to actually put more than just a bus stop into new developments? I say that openly without trying to stare anyone down in particular. Damien's sort of looking like he might have a thought. Let's go for Damien.
Sticking up a bus shelter can be a lot quicker than trying to develop an integrated transport hub, which tends to be the reason we go for that option. And it's quite interesting when you're looking at an integrated solution, the amount of work that goes into developing the rail element of that versus the amount that goes into, we'll just put a bus shelter there and we might get real time if we're lucky. We need to level it up quite a bit, I think, so that they're looked on in equal terms, because the bus is often looked at secondary once you've had to go through this massive process of building the station, and then you need the revenue funding to be able to put the service on to integrate with the network and with the rail as well. So
if you parked rail, put one rail to one side. Sorry to unintentionally mix metaphors. To build a hub with parking, particularly in a rural area, relatively cheap, but no one ever does it, and yet it would serve far more people than a bus shelter, because people could travel from other places to the hub in order to plug into the bus network. Is there a missing object here in planning use and land use terms? In other words, is there a missing concept that we see and hear about in other countries that we don't really have as part of our discussions in the UK?
Yeah, I don't think we think about it in those terms with bus enough. I think it's much more thought about in terms of other modes, and where you can develop those hubs, but it's got to be a hub where people, like a comment that was made earlier, where people feel confident to be able to wait if there's something that has happened, or where they can get information about reliable information, because even developing a hub in a rural area, if there's a problem with the connection on that, someone doesn't want to be left in that area, and we plan our education transport networks on the basis of hubs where there's a connection that the young people might be taken on by a minibus or a taxi to a particular point, and then they wait for the main coach or the local bus to come along, but someone stays with them to reassure them that they're not going to be left abandoned. So it's all that thing about confidence as well, and where people can get access to information if something goes wrong.
Thank you. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. It's easier, lower cost and quicker delivery to deliver bus rather than rail infrastructure, but it's got to meet the user's needs. It's got to have seating, somewhere to rest. It's got to have shelter, something physical. Standing in the rain at a bus stop for an infrequent service that might not be running to time is a very deterrent activity. So it's that sort of joined upness. And for reasons I don't really understand, we're seeing more areas actually rolling back from things like park and ride, which can, the joined upness of, rather than driving into the town centre, it's both a sustainability thing, air quality and, traffic-free town centres, to be able to drive to a park and ride and then get the bus. But park and ride seem to be being closed in some towns, rather than you'd expect it to be expanding. But it does have to meet the user's needs. It's about physical comfort and information and the reliability and frequency of services to make it work.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Just before we move on, I just want to, I suppose, just reflect on what Kate and Damien have just said in terms of the elephant in the room seems to be the commercial viability of a lot of this thing, which is obviously based around local government settlement, it's based around Section 106, and I suppose what we've got is you've got existing communities where we might want to improve what's there, which is one funding requirement, but then you've also got the different funding streams for a new build system, and I think the Section 106 requirement and having to prove the need. And so we've only got one question on this, but if there's any further thoughts you have on that, it would be useful to send them in to the committee, because I think that does feel to me like a big elephant in the room, is how is this funding allocated. And the buses bill and the railways bill are giving all these local authorities more powers, but it's not necessarily giving them the money, or they're going to have to choose which bit they fund it. My local authority have taken away bus shelters, for example, and they're struggling to keep services viable. So try defending that when you were on the committee that got told to look at them all individually one by one and sign them all off. Managed to politically avoid too much embarrassment. Anyway, I'm going to move on to question 14, because I think getting to discussing the integrated national transport strategy is going to be really important this morning, because that's ultimately what we're here to impact. And what I'm going to do, colleagues, is once we've talked about that, we'll finish off, and then if there's any further questions people want to do, if we've got time, there'll be an opportunity to ask them. But I just think it's really important we get to question 14 in particular. So, Ollie, I think you're down first, and then Lawrence, when you're ready.
Thank you, Chair. Very, very simply, witnesses, well, not very simply, the question's simple, the answers probably won't be. What would you most like to see in the upcoming integrated national transport strategy to support more joined-up journeys? Something that I think we're eagerly awaiting at some point in the near future. I think we've been awaiting it in the near future for some time, but maybe it will come. Let's start with Damien on the view screen.
I've had a look at this before, and I think we need we need it to set out how we have an integrated, coordinated function at an LTA level that covers access to all services. It's not just about the infrastructure. How do we plan services and functions within the public sector that can allow for that integration to take place?
Yeah, I'd like to see clarity on how the interface between the rail system and the mayoral combined authorities and other local bodies is going to be managed, in terms of who's actually going to have the say over what in terms of integration, things like holding trains for connections with buses and so on. The detail of this really matters. Like, everyone can write a nice statement about how important integration is, but what does it really look like? I mentioned the importance of thinking beyond just bus rail or bus rail bike, in particular making sure we think about car sharing, taxis and so on. And I do think it's important that national highways are part of this conversation. Can't have an integrated national transport strategy and then essentially a motorway management company that's separate from that. I think the planning discussion we have is really critical, but I think we've got to design with people. We've been very focused on our own individual modes. The rail network understands what goes on in rail. The bus operators focus on bus. We need to listen to people at this point and design the solutions that are going to work with them. So I would say early on, we really need to get some funding into sort of participation and making sure we get the design of it right.
I would say the high-level framework of how it approaches integration is really important. There's a risk that it just tries to do everything, and I think the most important thing to come out of it in its thinking is to have a sense of place, that integration means different things at different levels of geography, and that will require some focus. Okay, what do we mean by integration in, say, our big cities, in smaller urban areas, in a national sense? And it will need some sense of priority, a recognition that if you want to sort of meet the government's economic mission and deliver the largest economic benefits, a big part of that integration focus will have to be what happens in our big cities and connecting them up better. So I think that sense of place is really key that needs to come out.
Yeah, so we see the problem being currently, a lack of vision and a lack of joined upness in sort of planning and operating, which means you get isolation from the users. And we talked about things not being used since the road safety strategy we had a couple of weeks ago, which an enormous step forward in road safety, and that's a big part of integrated transport around safety. Shows what is possible about being ambitious in setting a vision of what good looks like. And that then takes you to what the elements. So what we'd like to see is a vision that combines modal shift, which both makes journeys work and more sustainable. So from a net zero perspective, resilience and connectivity, so it actually serves users and then gets used. And then that speaks to your point about it's not efficient. If you've not got good usage, it's not efficient, so it's not economic, so it doesn't get supported. That's safer, cleaner and more inclusive, and the vision needs to focus on that as well. And then it gives customer choice and experience. At the moment, people don't have choices because things aren't integrated. So if those four elements together form a vision, in the same way the road safety strategy has given a vision which is of a safe system, and then what do the individual bits of that mean, that has a real potential for change.
Anybody else want to ask anything on the strategy in particular? Great, okay. In which case, Lawrence, you had another supplementary, didn't you?
Yes, thank you. This isn't the first time that central government has been talking about wanting to encourage and coordinate better transport integration. There's a wonderful quote when Barbara Castle was appointed as Transport Minister in 1965, and Harold Wilson said to her, "Your job is to produce the integrated transport policy we promised in our manifesto. I could work something out myself given half an hour." Now, all these years later, if that had been achieved, we probably wouldn't be having this hearing today. So as the government produces its own integrated transport strategy, are there lessons that you think can be learned from previous government attempts to encourage greater integration?
I think probably the observation is now is the right time to be doing this. Previously, if you look back to 1998, they were trying to develop an integrated transport strategy with a thoroughly unintegrated set of modes of transport, each with their own set of interests. We are doing this at a point in time where those things are being brought together, at least in some places across the country. So this really is the time to seize on that and say to Active Travel England, to National Highway, let's pull all of this round together and make it work. I do think it is an opportunity and a timely one.
I would say, since that last one, the landscape of, political power has changed, and it's recognising that we have greater local powers in our big cities that have, without a strict national strategy, have improved transport a lot in their places, and it's recognising that as a reality and allowing them to continue doing the good work they're doing in those places. What can a national strategy do to support further improvements in that and provide the powers for them to get fully integrated networks in their city regions?
Thank you. And I know it's a document we're all eagerly anticipating. Coming on to the way that we measure transport benefits, and I know some of this has been touched on in earlier evidence. So starting with Ms. Carpenter, what metrics should be used to evaluate transport integration and its impacts? And I think we'd be particularly interested in panellists' views on the recent changes to the Green Book, and whether you think that those changes will achieve its stated aims.
So if we measured all of the impacts of transport, we would, as I say, take different decisions. At the moment, it's only journey time, pretty much. Everything's dominated by journey time. So if we included journey time and reliability, if we included the customer response in terms of their experience of the comfort and the safety and the convenience and the accessibility of that public transport infrastructure. People experience metrics combined with numerically quantified metrics, and then the health metrics probably are in many ways the biggest lever financially, but we tend to disaggregate health from an expenditure point of view. And social care, we know that social care is more than half of local authorities' budgets. Transport is one of the biggest things for reducing that, but we separate that. So if we included the health metrics of transport, of modes of transport and how they contribute, because we know the World Health Organization's got all the tools for quantifying the health outcomes of transport interventions, but we largely don't use those on a daily basis in planning and delivering transport.
Helpful.
The few indicators you look at in purely economic terms, you want to know about accessibility, connectivity to centres of employment found in big city centres, but also other centres of employment in those places. Simply how many people can reach these areas within a certain time, that gives you the effective size of your labour market there, and then the potential for that place. It's not just that someone could technically reach that place in that time. It's, can they easily do it? Is there a frequent service? Can they swap modes, etc.? And you can use open data to do these things. I think a couple of more simple metrics to keep an eye on and to demonstrate whether integrated transport is being successful in cities is public transport ridership. We know that UK cities lag behind European counterparts, and if you think about public transport being the most efficient way to get around dense urban areas, that is a key indicator. And I think within that, looking at trends on bus ridership, we know that the only place in the UK that has seen increasing bus ridership since 1990 is London. It's declined everywhere else. Do we start to see a reverse in trend for bus ridership in the rest of the UK?
Thank you. Mr. Marsden.
I don't think there's a shortage of measures in the Department for Transport's kind of calculation of the potential benefits. I think the problem is that we don't measure and capture those things in real life, as Kate said. Different modes have captured these things in different ways. Reliability means something different on the rail network to the bus network. This is not going to be straightforward, and I actually might be good to have some technical harmonisation, but I don't think that's actually what's going to tell us whether this is working or not. I think we need to be capturing the experience of users, and I think we need to understand what this does to the diversity of users of the network as well. We haven't been very good at doing that across modes, and I don't think we really understand how joining up actually, whether our interventions work. So we've got to focus on capturing that data. That does mean investing in monitoring and evaluation. So I would suggest some bigger trials, maybe like Bus Centre of Excellence. Let's focus down and really try and gather some of this evidence in the early period of the plan, and then roll it out to other places so that not everyone's having to repeat this exercise.
On that point around bigger trials, what would an appropriate geography be, in your view, for such an experiment in buses?
Damien might have a different view from me, focusing more on the rural areas. But from West Yorkshire, it doesn't totally define itself by the combined authority boundary, because you've got all the York stuff coming in. But I would say that you could probably do quite a lot focusing on combined authority kind of geography. That's how they would largely develop.
And Mr. Jones?
I think you could do something on a combined authority, and you could do something at a county level potentially. Maybe looking at one of the areas that's going into a new combined authority, such as Devon or Lancashire. I think the other thing, just moving on in terms of we capture a lot, and we do it particularly on bus. We capture a lot about what people think about it when they're using it. What we're not very good at is capturing why people don't, and I think we need some more data about why people don't feel confident in using the bus, and what would actually make them change their mode, and how could integration help with that, rather than just focusing on those that are already in the system.
Thank you, and that's a point that's come up in some previous evidence sessions as well. Something that we've been told in written evidence is that standard appraisal methods don't always serve particular areas very well. So areas with unusual geographies, for example, or rural areas, and unusual geographies might include Cornwall or Cumbria, for example. Do you think that there's a case for moving to place-based business cases for appraisal and evaluation of transport programmes? And do you think that there are some areas of the country that are disadvantaged by traditional business case and appraisal methods and lose out on investment as a result?
Personally, I think a lot of this comes down to the mindset of how we're going to allocate funding. If you look at the 5-stage business case, strategic case and so on, if you believe that the strategic case is really important in defining what we invest in, then your benefit cost ratio is about determining what the best way of achieving that particular outcome is. And we should be accepting that those outcomes are going to look different in different parts of the country. I think where this falls down is when we want to then somehow have some kind of rank order list that says, well, we should only really be investing in the top ones. That's capital allocation in a very different way to thinking about the strategic needs in different parts of the country. And I think that there is a tendency to get confused between the technical tool and then the application of that in supporting good decision making. So I think we can do a lot of this if we have that acceptance that actually, integrating transport in Cornwall is an important strategic outcome, and we're going to look at what it's going to cost us to do that.
Thank you. I wonder if I might invite Mr. Jones as well to comment on his question, bearing in mind that your members will include some of these areas.
Yeah, could you just repeat the question again? Is that all right?
So very simply, it's whether there's a case for moving from a single national approach to appraisal and business cases to something that is more place-based. The question comes about from evidence we've had from Cornwall Council and other areas which argue that they may be disadvantaged by the current standard approach.
I think it's really important, and when you're looking at those big rural areas, I remember having debates with government departments about the impact of an estuary, and you could be looking at a geographical area in terms of how you would cover that in terms of the transport investment. But if you've got a big piece of water in the way, that means people have to go round it. You have to look at it in a very different way. So I think it is better to be much more local to think about the geography of a given area compared to, say, in an urban area. It's very different. You don't have those same barriers.
No.
Thank you.
You want to come in? Oh, sorry.
You were saying there might be a general discussion after.
Yes. I'm just double checking with these two if either of you want to bring your question in at the end before I do the wrap-up question.
A mini one, yes.
Yes,
please.
fine, great. I'm going to bring Alex in now. Thank you, Lawrence. Sorry, we're just we've got a lot of questions and we've gone slower than we thought, so we're just having to juggle who still wants to ask the things that they wanted to ask.
So this one's specifically for Greg. So in your evidence, you talked about the need for a single point of truth for a transport network. What did you mean by that?
So who do you go to when things go wrong? Who is responsible for that journey? So I'll give you an example. I booked a car club connected to a train journey. Obviously booked it through 2 different providers. The train was late and the car club ended up being cancelled as a result of that. No one was in charge of helping me out to resolve that. So if we want an integrated system, then there has to be some responsibility for connected journeys, and I think maybe it's different at different scales, but if we want to offer those, market those as products to people, then it comes with it an accountability consequence. We talked about accountability earlier. Like who is in charge of that? Otherwise, it's just offerings on a card that you can pay for. That's one form of integration, but it's not.
And is there a role for government in doing that? Who should be this person?
Yeah, so I mean, in London, you would say TfL is pretty much seen to be the de facto responsible. I think the way it's going with the B network in Greater Manchester, there is an identity, and with that identity comes the accountability. Right, you are now on the B network and you're using this. I think that that's the kind of thing that I think I would be
possibly
looking
a role
for.
for passenger transport executives right across the country.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Brilliant, thank you, Alex. It's really helpful. Steph, do you want to?
No, I'm fine. Actually, we're going to move to general discussion.
Okay, I think what we'll do then is if I'll just go around the room and everyone's got the chance to ask a kind of final question if they like. I'll start with you.
Thank you. This has been a really interesting discussion for me because I think with integrated transport, I've been guilty of thinking about how we do it, but not necessarily why we do it. And of course, that's really important, isn't it? So, with lots of towns and cities in the UK are congested. So, is integrated transport, is that the aim? Really, is to reduce those non-essential car trips, get people into other modes of transport to reduce that congestion, or is it about making journeys happen which aren't happening just now? But I mean, we've talked about people with disabilities earlier, but there might be other journeys which will happen if people are better connected. Or is it some other reason, or is it everything?
I think it will vary place to place. I think if you're looking at joining up journeys in a rural area, you're possibly not focusing on congestion reduction, access to key services
city
and
MP,
so on.
so.
Yeah, okay. For some, mode shift will be a really important feature. I mean, I think if we're going to be on track with our climate targets, mode shift has to be one of the goals that sits behind this, but it will look different in different places, I think.
Is there anybody else on that?
No, I'd agree with that. It's about getting people from A to B by any which means, in which case in smaller places that might be car travel. In bigger cities it might be using public transport as a more efficient way. There's also the inclusion aspect, so we know that a third of our most deprived neighbourhoods don't have access to private transport, and that is much higher in our cities, so there's giving people the opportunities to access what they need, education opportunities, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I'd add we've had many decades of predict and provide approach of trying to build our way out of a crisis. I was told on my first day in Iris in 1988, you can't build your way out of a crisis. I do think we're still trying a bit. You can't build the capacity, the road capacity, that if everybody could drive everywhere and wanted to drive everywhere, you couldn't do that anyway. But it's more about giving people choices, and they do. There's a perception that everyone wants to drive everywhere, and they don't. They want good choices, they want reliable choices. It's about choices, it's about sustainability, that even the lowest emission vehicle is still a vehicle, and it's about accessibility and reducing the disparity of access to transport, which is a really big issue at the moment.
The point about choices, of course, is incredibly important, but talking about our cities, when we think about our cities, I mean, there's going to be winners if we get this right. But we have to accept that we can't deliver all those benefits without maybe some people losing out. And that's where the modal shift comes in, isn't it? Yes?
Yeah. It's that if each mode works well and the integration between them works well, including the ticketing, the pricing and the physical logistics, it reduces disparity rather than increasing it. What we've tended to do is give ever more benefit to the people who already had more opportunities and choices.
I'll just quickly add to that. It's a coordination problem in cities. You have to achieve some sort of modal shift in order to get everyone around faster and more efficiently. And actually, if you do that, if you encourage modal shift, you make things better for road users, those who have to use it, freight, and people who can't use public transport.
Of course, I was being a coward by talking about non-essential car journeys because everybody thinks their car journey is essential, and it's all the other drivers who are doing the non-essential journeys. Damien, sorry.
Sorry, it was just coming back to one of the points Robert said about there's a lot of people that can't access transport, and that has a big impact on their lives. And we particularly see it talking to colleagues in social care and in the NHS, that they're incurring significant costs in delivering care and delivering services because we haven't got transport for those people. And we've got cases where we've got young people that have been able to access public transport and integrated networks through training, and we're saving a significant amount of money for the councils by looking at it in a different way and making sure those young people can travel sustainably, which improves their life skills and all sorts of things. So it's a massive opportunity.
Yeah, it's a bit more than just transport, and I think our voters expect, our residents expect us to have these conversations and not just think about transport. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Lawrence, you've got a question ready to go, haven't you?
Just very quickly, you've mentioned some examples of international best practice and it's been done well. It's just if there are any other examples that you wish to bring to our attention.
I suppose you would add Switzerland as a way of simplifying the rail network and connectivity that spins off from the rail network.
I'd add somewhere, so Dijon, it's obviously cited in the Integrated National Transport Strategy, but I think it goes to show that having that unified power over every aspect of your local transport network pays real dividends in terms of modal shift, in terms of connectivity. But I would just say that Dijon isn't particularly special. It's everywhere across France, especially at city level, in local areas, and one big part of that is the fact that lots of these systems can partially self-fund by sort of raising local taxes, a top-up on payroll tax to go back into the transport system, and I think it makes a real difference on that.
Yes, some good examples of both the sort of built environment side and the organisational side. Metropolitan region Rotterdam, The Hague, introduced a policy on chain mobility, and I mentioned earlier around disproportionately that benefits some people who are most excluded at the moment. Cycling public transport integration, 84 regional hubs, creating a seamless transport experience. New Zealand is an example of digital integration of joining up plans so that you get integrated national ticketing, which makes journeys more seamless for users. Swiss model combines all modes, rail timetables, buses, other public transport, sort of clock-face services they arrive at the same minutes past each hour, and that gives a lot of confidence in when they're going to arrive, provided they do arrive at those minutes past the hour. And then some examples in the UK, Eden Project in Cornwall and National Trust Greenway House Dartmouth in Devon, we think are good examples of effective integration of that transport.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Do we need to look at all transport from a completely different end of the picture or side of the picture? Because we seem to start with inherently modes. We think, and actually at the end of it all, most of the activity and investment is within departments, within teams, within modes. Do we not need to start the whole thing by looking at it from the perspective of people and places? And is that a missed opportunity / until we get there, actually this is all just going to be tinkering type problem?
I'd agree with that. I think back to the national transport strategy, it has to have a good sense of place, particularly that at a national level you're thinking about different things and what your transport network is doing, whether that be motorways or intercity train travel. And then when you get to your local places, particularly your city economies, transport is playing a very different role. It's connecting local people up to different places. Starting from that and working out the details afterwards, I think would be a really good way to start.
My question is the Department for Transport going to be willing to hand over more freedom and control to local areas if this is in fact about understanding more about what people do in their communities? Then you kind of have to cut the strings a little bit of the modal silos that we've been working and regulating in. So what's going to change in their practices to enable that? And there is that balance of oversight and accountability and freedom. And I think, again, these things need to be part of the discussion in the strategy. So great question.
Yeah, I'd endorse that. And there's a distinction between what's seen and what's done. At the moment, customers see lots of different individual train operators, and that's confusing and undermines them. It doesn't matter whether there are different operators, different modes of transport. What matters is the user experience. So if the way we present the information, the accessibility of information, so on, works for them, it doesn't really matter how it's organised. We have made things more disparate over the years, different, bus deregulation. You see what's happening in Manchester, they're bringing things back under control. That's delivering better clarity for the customer. Their actual experience is improving because it both works more effectively and it can be seen more effectively. And those things work together. If people don't understand it, it doesn't really matter whether it works in theory. Their experience, it should be based on the user, just the same as the hospital should be based on the patient, but actually it's based on the specialties rather than the patient too often.
Yeah, great analogy. And Damien, any thoughts from you?
Yeah, I think we do concentrate particularly on modes, and because of the way funding works, you go for where you think you're going to get the funding to develop a service or an infrastructure rather than what is the best mode. I think as an example, someone mentioned earlier about coach, and there isn't any funding streams to develop a network of coach services like there is for rail or bus. So, they tend to be just if something's commercially viable, but the opportunity in an area, a large area, particularly a rural area, is massive. And if you sample the Southwest Falcon service, that's an example of something that we're developing park and ride connections with it and all sorts of stuff, but it's coming on the back of little investment, and if you have the investment in it, you could improve it so much more.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you.
All I was to say is one of my staff members gets to work in Plymouth on the Falcon from Exeter, so it just goes to show that you have to use a bus that's aimed for an airport to get from the two biggest cities in the town. So anyway, great. Any further questions from anybody else, or shall I do the final wrap up? Okay, in which case I'm going to ask two things. One thing I feel that is really important, particularly thinking about, we've obviously looked at the buses bill and the railways bill in this committee as well, and a lot of the time devolution comes up, the different mayoralties versus areas, which I think Jacob's touched on, areas that don't have that yet. Do you think we're in danger unless the integrated national transport strategy really takes us by the horns of creating, through all of these strategies and bills, a two-tier system where you've got the bits that get to have strategic mayoral authorities and everywhere else, and therefore would a recommendation be that we need to push the government to make sure with the integrated transport strategy that it's actually factoring in those rural areas, in particular in those areas that are going to be those later adopters, because I know where the direction of travel is. But so do you think we're in danger of creating that two-tier system? It's kind of a bit of a leading question, but anyway. And then what single government policy or intervention do you think would be most effective in facilitating transport integration and delivering more joined up journeys for transport users? So what would be your one wish that you would want to see in that strategy? I'll start with you, Greg.
Yeah, so I think it would be really important to get them to spell out how this is going to work institutionally in the different settings. If this is an integrated national transport strategy, then we have to be clear about how it works in these different areas now, even if they are going to transition later. And I think things like what the instructions are to GBR about how they interface with these different things is just one example of how to do that. In terms of my single wish, I would like to see us go for a kind of at-scale mobility hub trial, which involves investing in our suburban areas and really focusing on creating the look, feel and experience of a safe and joined up network.
Damien, I'll bring you in.
I think from working in an area that's going through that process of change, I think what we want to make sure of is that we don't lose the benefits that we've achieved in integrating transport, and that there is a sort of a fear in membership through ATCO that if the decisions aren't made in the right way, we will lose the opportunity to integrate rather than. And there are solutions to be able to do it. And, through ATCO, I've talked to colleagues in Scotland about how it works in Strathclyde and all sorts of things. So I think sometimes between the devolved regions of the UK, there's an opportunity to look at potential as well. I think in terms of a single government policy, I think I deal with lots of government departments, and what would be really good is to join up those government departments to think about integrated transport, so you get better access to health, better access to education and better access for employment opportunities, rather than it being a single sort of discussion with each. That would be my dream.
Robert.
Yeah, so on the devolution point is really important. Obviously, we're getting local government reorganisation, and then with that, there's more scope for greater local transport powers. I'm less concerned about the two-tier thing, just because I think that having given greater powers to our city regions is the right way to do it. These are places with the capacity to make the changes. They're there to demonstrate the powers and the benefits of local transport, and then it allows these other places to follow their lead and take steps in their local areas while recognising that maybe in some areas they don't need as many local powers as places with such a large economy. So I think it seems to be the right way of doing it. Obviously, in practice, when that big reorganisation happens, then the delivery of that is important. In terms of my one wish, it would be a commitment to rail devolution, particularly from GBR, where we know that it's still sort of working out how it's going to run the railway network and what it's going to do. And it has this partnership of working with mayors and combined authorities. What we haven't seen yet is a commitment to say we aim to build local capacity in these places, and the end goal is to let mayors and city regions have local control over their rail networks, which for most places, including London, is like the missing piece of the puzzle for a fully integrated system. And if you care about, you know, the local economic performance of these places and national economic performance, then powers over things that are plugged into the local economy should be at that local level. So I think rail devolution within GBR is my one wish.
Yeah, in terms of the two-tier, yes, absolutely, it's a problem now and potentially a problem to get worse. And as I mentioned, the disparity in life expectancy and access to transport are integrally linked, and they tend to be worst in the places that aren't those city regions. So it's critical that we keep everybody moving forward, and it's that making sure we're creating metrics and measurements to deliver that. In terms of the one wish, it would be, I think, that the system is orientated to users and they're engaged. You know, this expression used in stakeholder engagement, nothing about us without us. We do tend to focus on telling people what's good for them rather than asking them what they want. But we need to remember that sometimes their perception might be, well, I can't do this because it's too difficult. And the biggest benefit in transport comes from a very small amount of physical activity. A walk to a bus stop actually is a disproportionately beneficial physical activity. And we have an enormous proportion of the public who take no physical activity at present. And the cost to the country in health and social care is immense. Yeah. And that's the prize. The prize is health. It's also sustainability, air quality, carbon emissions and so on. But health is the biggest cost to the public and financially.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. That concludes today's session. Thank you so much for your evidence. I feel it's been a very rich morning, actually, and I think we could have gone on so many other topics. So thank you for what you have been able to share with us. But therefore, please do feel free to write to us with anything you feel you haven't been able to cover in your answers this morning. And we will look forward to having our next oral session on this inquiry towards the end of February. So that concludes today's meeting.